The Minister for Housing, Local Government and Heritage, Darragh O'Brien, is on the line. Minister, good morning to you.
Good morning, Mary.
We head into these level 5 restrictions with COVID cases standing at 262 per 100,000. A virus, we're told, that's out of control, that is spreading in the community. In 6 weeks' time, Minister, what does success look like? What are we aiming for?
Well, we need to stop the growth of the virus, frankly. We need to get the R0 down to below 1. We need to all work together, and many of our people have been. We all have been for the last number of months. This is a difficult decision that has, wide-ranging effects, particularly on sectors like retail and hospitality, and we know that. But we're doing this to tackle the virus head-on, to suppress its growth, so that we can open up again in December. And this, we're over the coming months, we may have to vary how we approach things. When we see cases rising as fast and as significantly as they have over the last 2 weeks, particularly over the last week. So it was a tough decision, but the right decision, and a decision in the interest of public health and saving people's lives. We've done that on the back of the additional business supports that we brought in the budget just last week, but further measures that will be announced in detail today in relation to the increase of the PUP, improvements to the wage subsidy scheme, the COVID restriction support fund for businesses, many of the things that in your Vox Pop earlier on, the business owners were talking about. So our job is to protect public health and also to try to protect people through this and their livelihoods. That's difficult, but the resources have been put behind it. So really what we're asking people to do over the next 6 weeks is to stay within 5 kilometres of home, to abide by the public health advice and the measures that we need to take, and not to travel unless it's for essential reasons. And they're the right things to do, and working together on this, we can suppress this virus and we can get it back under control.
Minister, is 6 weeks the minimum time period to do all that you have said? Could it be longer?
Look, NPHET have advised us that 6 weeks is the appropriate length of time, and we will be keeping this under review during the course of that, but it needs to be a sustained period of time, and that was discussed at length by myself and my colleagues with the Taoiseach and Taoiseach yesterday at Cabinet. So that is the optimum time frame that would lead us to have these measures to take effect. Like we had level 3 for over 30 days in Dublin. That did have somewhat of a stabilising effect initially, but that actually starts to creep back up the numbers within Dublin, and we've seen counties like Cavan whereby they're presenting over 800 cases per 100,000. So the measures, I think, was really difficult for people, and I know people are that there's a fatigue in some quarters with this, and I get that, but we're resilient and working together we can tackle this. But 6 weeks, to answer your question, is the optimum time frame,
and we could be now looking at 4 weeks. Is there a certain irony that one of the loudest voices we hear raised yesterday in support of going to level 5 was the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, talking about a preemptive strike against the virus. His was the voice speaking against going to level 5 2 weeks ago. The NPHET advice then, as now, was level 5.
Well, no, I don't think so. Look, the Cabinet operate as a collective, and we had a long and detailed discussion yesterday, and our Cabinet subcommittee on COVID, which the Taoiseach and Taoiseach and Minister Ryan sat on, have been engaging right through the weekend. So, lest we forget that only a few short weeks ago we were also further advised that remaining in level 2 in certain counties was the way forward. But I think what we got to do is act on the information that we have now. It's very compelling. In some instances, it's very worrying, but we're confident, though, that by taking these measures and taking them early, which it is, and being decisive about it, that we can really get control of this.
But a U-turn it is, Minister, would you accept, in the face of the NPHET evidence and the numbers before you?
Respectfully, I don't actually, Mary. I think, this virus doesn't adhere to any particular plan. It moves, it graduates, it goes up and down. So we always have to refine what we're doing to tackle that. There will never be one definitive approach that's going to actually suppress this. And we've even seen in countries like Sweden where they had, where they had very little restrictions. Now they're looking to go into restrictions. We look at what's happening in Belgium, where the Belgians are seriously concerned about their health system being overwhelmed. We only have to look look at our nearest neighbour in Britain and up in the north of Ireland as to what's happening to see how this virus operates. It doesn't actually, respect plans. So that does mean that we have to be fair, Mary, we have to be nimble about things. We have to be able to adapt at the right time. This is the right time for these measures. This is difficult. It's difficult particularly for certain sectors like the non-essential retail as it's classed and hospitality. But what we want to do is to protect people through it so we can get these businesses back up and running.
And Minister, I want to talk to you about the memo you take to Cabinet on evictions today. What is going to happen?
Well, I brought in measures in August that were very targeted at those whose incomes and jobs had been affected by the pandemic. Those measures have worked and they remain in place, but they're targeted at specific people who are particularly vulnerable. The measures I'm bringing to Cabinet today are a blanket approach that would actually ban evictions for the period of the restrictions. And the reason for that is, with the restrictions, we're obviously asking people to restrict their movement to within 5 kilometres of their home. So we've got to be able to help people not to be able to move homes and move from one home to another during that period. So this is in addition to the measures that I brought in August, which thankfully have had a really good and positive effect. These measures will come to Cabinet this morning. I intend to bring the bill to the Dáil and Shannon this week, so it's enacted. And what this will do is that should we, and God forbid, we have to in future go back into these type of measures, that this protection would kick back in automatically. So it sets up these.
So you can reactivate these measures if you need to at later times. Okay.
Yes, exactly. And that's the
does
way in
it
which
also mean, though, that people can be saved perhaps from the anxieties of receiving the likes of notices to quit during that period?
Yeah, well, notices to quit can be issued, and I think that was one thing just earlier on the show where there was a mention of nearly 400 evictions taking place between March and June. They weren't actually evictions, they were eviction notices. The Dáil and Shannon actually brought in an eviction ban for that period of time, so very few of them would have been enacted or acted upon. The only
Do you know how many were acted upon?
Well, the only exceptions would be for serious antisocial behaviour or indeed criminal behaviour, and I think people will understand why that in those instances protections wouldn't have been offered. Furthermore, we brought in protections back in August under the Residential Tenancies Act, which some parties in the opposition didn't see fit to support. But having said that also, I'll give you an example, in that period of time that has come in, about 200 notices to quit were issued, but about 184 self-declarations of protection from eviction were actually sought and granted in that period. So these measures, Mary, are working, and they're appropriate that they're there, that we need to strengthen and protect tenants' rights during the pandemic, whilst respecting the fact that others may own that property, and we have to act legally and within the Constitution as well.
I want to talk to you as well, and it was raised by Pearse Doherty earlier, a break on mortgage payments for those who now find themselves out of work again through no fault of their own. And this time, can government put pressure on the banks to deal with this question of interest?
Well, my understanding is that the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donohoe, and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Michael McGrath, will be further engaging with the banks based on the decision that's been taken. What I've done as Minister for Housing, the mortgages that are under my purview, which is the Rebuilding Ireland Home Loan, and that we have granted a further 3-month extension to the moratorium, and that has been in place we did that a few weeks ago. Now, thankfully, many people who actually went into the mortgage moratorium, a sizable portion of them, well over 50%, actually returned to paying their mortgage in full.
But for others, Minister, interest is mounting up. It can damage people's credit rating. Yeah. You're storing up problems for the future.
Well, look, that's not what we want to do. These are unprecedented times, and I think the measures that were taken at the very start of the pandemic and continued right through it have had an effect of protecting people, and we want to continue to be able to do that. And as I said to you, my colleagues will be further engaging with the banks and the mortgage lenders in this regard, because we want to make sure that, as best as possible, that the state does what it can to protect people. And I think you'll see from the additional measures that we announced yesterday in relation to increasing PUP, in relation relation to the wage subsidy scheme and other measures to support businesses, that we haven't been found wanting in that regard. The budget last week as well was the largest budget in the history of the state. We'll continue to invest in infrastructure and housing, that the construction sector will continue through level 5 as well, to deliver the essential homes that we actually need for people.
And on that, Minister, this question of construction this time continues.
Yes.
It comes within the essential sector definition. Retail, as you know, particularly concerned, particularly upset. 60,000 jobs, they say, could be lost, and the fate of many sealed for the future. They won't be back. Did you consider being able to allow elements of retail continue?
Yeah, everything was considered,
why
Mary,
not?
but we have, we obviously have a plan that we want to adhere to. You can't be picking from one and adding to the other.
But that's precisely what you've done. We have level 5 with some differences to what we were given in your roadmap.
No, not really, Mary. On construction, in fairness, we've been very clear at 4 and 5, and I'd already engaged with the sector last week that about 200,000 people who work in the sector, and the ancillary services, by the way, such as water, electricity, utilities, all of those the work would still continue, and not just on essential maintenance or repair, effectively in relation to carrying on with building work. And we've been clear on that, and obviously we look at it. The one thing everything we do is guided by the best public health advice that we get.
Okay, the whole question of schools...
It's important, if you let me say this, there is no decision is taken by government to simply shut down a sector for the sake of it. It's done to protect people and to protect those jobs into the future and the livelihoods into the future. If this virus was allowed to continue unchecked, as has happened in Europe, and let's look at what's happening in Europe and in Britain and other jurisdictions, we would not be recovering those jobs, and that's our intention to do that. And that's why we have, put the largest budget and business supports in place to protect jobs and to help people through this by increasing and enhancing the pandemic payment and other supports. So that's why we're doing it. So it's not a question of just...
From NPHET and from government, we've heard about the importance of schools and keeping schools open. I don't know if you heard the teachers' unions talking to us a little earlier on.
I didn't.
Well, we had the INTO and the ASTI, and both are particularly critical, shambolic, a word used by the INTO, particularly around this whole issue of testing and tracing and communication within schools now. And it really seems, Minister, that you are storing up a problem. Will schools be back after the midterm break?
No, schools will be back. Can I firstly say that our teachers, boards of management, our cleaners, SNAs, everyone working in the schools have been doing a magnificent job. My own daughter goes to primary school here. I see it firsthand, the work that is being done by our teachers, and they are at the front line.
They are, and they want more than pats on the heads and being told they're doing a great job. They say they want testing and contact tracing stepped up
Mary,
within the schools.
Any concerns? We've been engaging regularly with the teachers on a daily basis. The Minister for Education, Norma Foley, and indeed the Taoiseach.
They've looked for information on numbers. They say they haven't received it.
If you don't mind, because this is really important. And firstly, it's really important that people understand that the schools will remain open. Where concerns are raised by teachers, of course they will be addressed, and by teachers' representatives, and they will, because this government respects teachers and thanks them for the work that they're doing, because our kids and their education is absolutely vitally important. So everything we're doing, and one of the things that we are doing, is to make sure that our kids continue and our young adults continue to get educated and continue to go to school. And if you look at when we had the initial lockdown, that all schools were closed. This is important. So now we have schools open, we have our childcare sector open.
And you say they will stay open.
Disability day services, which are really important for families as well, remain open. That's not insignificant, but we will only continue to do that when we work in partnership, which we have been doing with our teachers, and we'll continue to do that. And where concerns are raised, they will be addressed, and we haven't been found wanting insofar as additional investment and resources for schools.
Thank you very much for your time this morning, the Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien.